Today, we're going to talk about revision drafts. After finishing your second draft, you should have something resembling a novel. The idea that once lived only in your head is now on paper for other people to read and experience. That is a crazy cool thing. Maybe you wrote a naturally amazing second draft. Maybe you're done. Maybe your prose is already perfect and you've already included everything that you could. Maybe you're a god. Or maybe you're normal and your book is not quite there yet. So how do you get it to a place where it's as strong as you can make it on your own? So let's break down how I tackle third, fourth, and subsequent revision drafts. So once you have a second draft that hits all of the marks that you need it to hit in your novel, what you need to do is turn up the heat. What does this mean? Make the conflict more intense. Make the romance more intense. Make it scarier. Make the characters clearer. Ask yourself, what can I do to make this story a more intense version of itself? How can I manipulate the elements of my story to tell a clearer and stronger version of that story? The way you do this is by looking objectively at your story and figuring out where all of the major conflicts are. In my horror book, one of the subplots is the conflict between Shiloh, my protagonist, and her boyfriend of 3 years, Miles. My first and second draft showed Miles and Shiloh happy until Shiloh's little brother goes missing. After that, things became difficult because Shiloh wasn't opening up to Miles about how she was feeling, and there was just a level of discomfort in their relationship that ultimately the conflict revolved around. After finishing my second draft, I knew that something wasn't quite right about this relationship. If they were together for 3 years, something had to have been working about their relationship, and there's going to be a level of comfort in their relationship that would allow Shiloh to confide in Miles about all the things that's going on in her mind. I wanted there to be a conflict between them that couldn't be resolved by a simple conversation or simple communication, because that would be too easy. I wanted readers to seriously doubt whether or not they would actually be together in the end. There was a conflict in their relationship, but I needed to turn up the heat. So what I did in my third draft is that I made their relationship newer, and I also made it Shiloh's first relationship. Instead of dating for 3 years, they'd only been dating 3 weeks. They were still getting to know each other, and so the comfort level wasn't there. And because it was Shiloh's first relationship, this explained why she was hesitant to open up to him, because she'd never had someone in her life that she could open up to in the same way. This simple change heightened everything about their relationship, from its fragility to its intensity. This change made the conflict bigger, and then made their relationship more fun to read about. If you've seen the last 2 videos I've made for this playlist, this next step will probably not surprise you. Before you write a revision draft, you need to redo your outline. I outline my revision drafts using the same method that I do for my second drafts. If you haven't seen my video on writing second drafts, I'm linking it right here. Go watch that video if you want to learn more about this outlining process. I write my second drafts in Excel, and when I'm writing a third draft, I color code it. I keep the old outline for my second draft and just add to it in different colors. Things I'm adding to the book, I put in green. Things I'm deleting from the book, I put in red. I fill up all of the boxes that I can on the Excel and flesh it out as much as I possibly can using these different colors. I spend a lot of time at this stage really thinking about the story and thinking of it more as a piece of art rather than a book. It helps me to think of the outline as a painting. Maybe that's because I'm using colors. I already have a list of changes that I've created in my Scrivener document of things that I want to change for the next draft. For example, when I was going into writing the third draft of my horror book, I already had a list of things that I wanted to do, such as make it scarier and different ways that I could change the book in order to make it scarier, and different foreshadowing things, including symbols, changing names, adding different characters, and centering it all around a high-level question, which was, what would the world look like if ghosts were real and some people could bring them back from the dead? When I'm working on the outline, I can look at all of these changes and figure out exactly where to put them into the book. Another thing I do when I write my third drafts is that I add symbols. Symbols are a very cool literary device that are super fun to include in your books. Symbols are words, people, places, and ideas that represent something beyond their literal meanings. One example of a symbol you can use in your story is using, let's say, a book to represent two people's love for one another. Let's say person A and person B really love that same book, and they've spent a lot of time together reading that book. Let's say that they get into a fight in your story and something happens to the book. That thing happening to the book, like a page tearing out or like it getting soaked in water, represents the emotional turmoil between person A and person B at that point in time. This book has become something more than a book. It is a symbol for that particular relationship. Symbols can take all sorts of different forms. I've written symbols into my books in the form of hats, in the form of myths and legends, or even in really simple things like poems. Something that's fun to do when writing your third draft is isolating all the different things you can include symbols about and writing them into your story. Don't go overboard with it. You don't need to have a symbol for everything, but having a couple of symbols about the really important things makes your book a little bit more artistic and kind of clever. It helps more effectively drive the message of the book home. I recommend adding a column in your outline just dedicated to symbols. That way you can include all of your different symbols and figure out where you're going to mention them throughout your book. That brings me to my next tip for writing third drafts. Use this opportunity to hone your tone. Hone your tone? What does that mean? Well, your tone has to correspond to your genre. If you're writing a horror novel, you want your tone to sound scary. If you're writing a romance novel, you want it to sound romantic and airy and breezy and all of those other wonderful things that come when you're reading romance novels. Often in the first stages of your book, your tone isn't going to be exactly where you want it to be. You're just going to be focused on getting the book to exist. You're not really going to be focused on what the book sounds like. This is the opportunity to fix how it sounds. In the third draft of my horror book, I went through and marked down a place in every single chapter where I could mention something that was scary and therefore fit the tone of a horror novel. Sometimes these things were big, sometimes they were small. In chapter 1, I described a monster found in one of my main character's nightmares in graphic detail. In chapter 2, I described one woman as having very harsh and pointy features that were pretty scary to my main character. In another chapter, the horror detail was a little more overt, and one of my characters had revealed to have had some of their fingers snipped off with scissors. These details are short and didn't necessarily serve the story, but they served to fill out the tone and make it fit with the kind of story that I wanted to write. I would also add a separate column on your outline for these little details that sharpen your tone. This is a way to pretty easily bring your book to the next level. Revision drafts are also a time where you can edit for prose. I usually do this in its own draft, but you can do this, I guess, as you're working on other things too. I'm extremely wordy when I write, and I'm definitely an overwriter. This means that when I have to edit for prose, I have to do a lot of trimming. This is why I do this in its own separate draft, but if you don't have as much trimming to do, you can easily work it into your other rounds of edits. As I'm trimming, I try to make every single sentence as concise as it possibly can be. I'm not trying to make the book shorter, I'm just trying to make it easier to digest. I tend to edit for prose for as long as I can until it's as polished as I can make it. Be careful with this though. You have to know when to stop, otherwise you will be editing your prose forever. Your prose is never going to be perfect, but you just want to make sure that it's clean and that it incorporates all the things that you want to do with it. If you guys are interested, I can make a separate video on exactly how I trim sentences and the words that I cut out of my writing in order to make it more concise. By the end of your third draft, you should have a version of the book that's clean, that is readable, that has things like symbols, and that has a tone that's consistent with your genre, and where you've fixed all of the little issues and turned up the heat in all of your conflicts. This is not only going to make your book a book, but a good book, and an exciting book, and a fresh and fun book to read, and a book that your readers are going to want to read. So write your third drafts with this in mind, and think of your third drafts as more of a small tweaking draft instead of a complete overhaul like your second draft was. This should be fun. Third drafts are fun. And whatever you do, don't forget to turn up the heat. That's all for today's video. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for new videos coming your way on how to write books for beginners, and also on different topics relating to writing. And as always, happy writing.